Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, the beloved BBC TV sitcom Dad's Army is revived for the big screen with an all-star British cast, but can it live up to the original? The year is 1944 and Britain faces the threat of invasion from the Nazis, and the hunt is on for a spy who is leading the potential attack. When a radio signal is traced to Wilmington-on-Sea, the Home Guard, including Toby Jones's Captain Mannering, Bill Nighy's Sergeant Wilson, Michael Gambon's Private Godfrey, Blake Harrison's Private Pike, Tom Courtenay's Lance Corporal Jones, Daniel May's Private Walker, and Bill Patterson's Private Fraser, all volunteers ineligible for military service, are assigned to find whoever it is. But the arrival of beautiful reporter Rose Winters, played by Catherine Zeta-Jones, to write a piece on their exploits may leave them blind to what's right in front of them. You cannot overstate how important a part of British culture Dad's Army is, even though they haven't made an episode of it in 30 years. The series wrapped up in the mid-70s and it only ran for 9 series with around 80 episodes. It's still incredibly popular, even to this day. In fact, they still repeat those episodes. They run every Saturday night on BBC Two, and they still draw in millions of viewers. There is still a clear fan base for the show, and it is such a part of our sort of cultural legacy. It's generally considered to be one of the best sitcoms ever devised, and it frequently tops many lists over here of best sitcoms. It's as much a part of British culture as something like, say, Fawlty Towers or Monty Python. The fact that Dad's Army has actually had a movie is not surprising in and of itself, because there's actually already been a Dad's Army movie in 1971 between the 3rd and the 4th series of the show. Columbia Pictures did a film version of Dad's Army with the original cast, and it basically serves as a remake of some of the earlier episodes of the show, remaking them on a bigger budget and in colour. I'm not overtly familiar with Dad's Army, so I actually went and re-watched that original film from 1971, and I wasn't a huge fan of it. I didn't find it all that funny, but it has to be understood that film had its own compromises, that apparently the creative crew behind the show and the cast weren't entirely satisfied with it. You can kind of understand why it doesn't quite have the right speed or energy. It seems to be just lacking that certain something, and the fact they've gone back to Dad's Army, not a surprise, because the existence of the Dad's Army movie is a sort of capitalisation of two things. It's a capitalisation of, one, remaking TV shows for the big screen, your sorts of movies like The Inbetweeners, or Bad Education, or Keith Lemon, and you've also got the movies for the grey pound market, your Best Exotic Marigold Hotels, or your Song for Marians, which have proved to be quite big multiplex hits over here. So they've put these two sort of genres together, that Dad's Army fits within these two. And you can even see that in their cast, because you have Bill Nighy from the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, and you have Blake Harrison from The Inbetweeners, whose casting here is clearly meant to draw in some younger viewers. Not that that seems to have done a lot of that, but that's the intention of his casting. But the thing is, the reason I bring up the original Dad's Army movie was because, even for all its faults and compromises, it's still a recognisably Dad's Army movie. You can tell that that is the show. That's not the case with the Dad's Army reboot. The Dad's Army reboot doesn't feel anything like the show whatsoever, or even the movie based off the show. And I'll tell you what, for the first 10 minutes of the movie, it sort of feels like a Dad's Army movie. I mean, you've got Captain Mannering, and he's leading all the crew together, and they end up getting chased by a cow, and everything seems to be going alright. And then Catherine Zeta-Jones turns up. The second she arrives, this movie nosedives. The problem with Catherine Zeta-Jones entering this movie is manifold. Let's start with it from the sort of spy movie perspective, because that's what this movie wants you to take it from. We're set up that there is this spy, and whoever it is has been making broadcasts in the sort of Wilmington-on-Sea area, so we know that at some points the Dad's Army crew are going to have to find the spy. And the second Catherine Zeta-Jones turns up, you know who it is. It's not exactly a secret, because she's She's an invented character for this movie. There is only one obvious suspect as to who it could be. And as if that wasn't enough, they tell you that she's the spy in her second scene. We are shown her giving messages to Berlin. And so we have to spend the rest of the movie waiting for the actual cast to wake up to the idea that maybe she's a spy. The dramatic irony that we know she's a spy, but the crew aren't, I can understand. That's supposed to be the joke, that they're mining humour out of the fact that they're completely oblivious to what is right in front of them. Okay, fine. You know what would be really great though? Jokes. Or situations, or scenarios that actually played off of that. It doesn't really work, because what happens to the Dad's Army movie is that it stops trying to be Dad's Army, and it starts becoming this weird sort of romantic comedy where you've got this love triangle quartet going on because Mannering, Wilson and Pike are all competing to get Catherine Zeta-Jones' affections, and that doesn't work because we know she's the spy. We know that no one's going to get the girl because the girl is the bad guy. What? And yet the movie devotes so much time to this one joke across the entire movie that it just sinks the entire thing. It's so tedious to watch this being strung out. And I'm not blaming Catherine Zeta-Jones for ruining the Dad's Army remake. This is purely down to a terrible script. The script is atrocious. It doesn't do anything with the characters. It doesn't know what to do with these characters, so it just basically discards them. I mean, this movie has a fantastic cast. You have Toby Jones as Captain Mannering, you've got Bill Nighy as Wilson, you've got Tom Courtenay as Jones, Blake Harrison as Pike, elsewhere you've got Michael Gambon, and you've got Mark Gatiss in there, and you've got some of the original cast members still surviving, like Ian Lavender, and yet most of them are completely sidelined, especially in the second act. There are long stretches where Tom Courtenay, for example, disappears, or Michael Gambon. I can't remember that almost anything that Michael Gambon contributes to this movie, except a scene fairly early on where he has to urinate on Tom Courtenay while he's dressed as a tree because he's caught short. That's the only thing I remember Michael Gambon doing in this movie. And the only one that almost comes out of it alright is Toby Jones. And it's because Toby Jones is an absolutely fantastic actor, and he's really working hard with this. He is working so hard in these scenes where he has to flirt and banter with Catherine Zeta-Jones, and occasionally he stumbles onto something funny, and while he's not really doing an impression of Arthur Lowe's original performance as Mannering. He's definitely derived it from it, but he's playing it towards the more broad humour that this reboot is so fond of, and he almost makes it work, even in spite of the fact that it is obviously an inflated version of this character that loses that sense of down-to-earth reality that Dad's Army was sort of rooted in. There are moments, for example, where Toby Jones manages to bring it back down to something, human and relatable, like the scene where he's speaking with Catherine Zeta-Jones and he's eating a cake and he gets it lodged in his throat and starts choking a little bit. That moment in particular is genuinely funny, and it's far funnier and more relatable to Mannering's character in the original TV show than all the sort of really forced stuff where she tries to seduce him by comparing him to Winston Churchill, and he spends half the film going around without his glasses so he can't see anything. And the rest of the cast don't play off each other in anywhere near the same way as the original cast because they don't get the opportunity to. There's very few scenes where they're together because, I hate to say it, Catherine Zeta-Jones, she eats up all the screen time. The attention is entirely on her character for a lot of the movie. I don't understand when they were writing this script and when they were filming it, why no one said, hey, people are going to see a Dad's Eye movie, not a Catherine Zeta-Jones movie. And Catherine Zeta-Jones' performance is not exactly that great. It's another one of her post-comeback roles where she's playing either a villain or a shrew, and I don't understand why Catherine Zeta-Jones has suddenly been pigeonholed into these roles. And don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with female characters in this movie per se. One of the things that the movie tries to address in some senses is that Dad's Army is a very, kind of a boys' club in some senses. It's almost an entirely male cast. In the original show, for example, Captain Mannering's wife was not actually an on-screen character. She was always sort of just off-screen, whereas here they've turned it into a fully fledged character, and there are a lot more female roles in the background. There's actually this sort of female Dad's Army going on the sidelines, who again don't really figure into the movie very much, but at least they're there. It seems like a token effort to try and build some more female characters and acknowledge that women played an important part in the war effort as much as men did, and that's fair enough. I don't mind that particular addition to the film version. I just wish they kind of did it in a way which felt a bit more natural. But the biggest issue is that director Oliver Parker has no idea how to do comedy in terms of his direction. Which is odd, because he's best known as the guy that did Johnny English Reborn, which was not actually a very good comedy either. So I don't understand why he was handed the reins to this particular franchise, because in Johnny English Reborn, that suffered from a distinct lack of jokes, and the same thing happens here. It's like Parker decided he was making a spy movie that just happens to have 6 or 7 broad comic set pieces in it, which often fall completely flat. This movie is so tedious and dull because the plot line doesn't go anywhere for a very long stretch of the time. It's just the same thing where they're trying to seduce Catherine Zeta-Jones, and she's all tricking them, and we don't care about any of it. We just want the plot to move on. I was actually feeling so sleepy and tired during this movie that when Jones is holding someone hostage and his gun accidentally fires into the ceiling, the loudness of that shot suddenly woke everyone up in the cinema. And on a scripting and directing level, it doesn't seem like, Parker or anyone on the creative crew are really big fans of the TV show or particularly understand it. Like, it suddenly becomes incredibly postcard boardy. For example, there are lines like, "You just slipped her a sausage, didn't you?" Things like that. It feels less like Dad's Army and more like a Carry-On movie, one of those bad later Carry-On movies. In fact, I can name you exactly one of the later bad Carry-On movies, because it's Carry-On England, generally regarded to be one of the worst of that particular set of movies. Although maybe I was also being distracted by the fact that clearly the filmmakers don't have a care for actual accuracy when it comes to the Second World War, one that most people might actually be familiar with. The most bizarre being that the film is set in 1944, as opposed to the TV series, which is set in 1940 and around Dunkirk. The idea that Britain was terrified about being invaded from the Germans in 1944 when the war was almost over seems inherently ridiculous. And then we have a key plot point in the film in the way that Catherine Zeta-Jones' character dresses that causes some suspicion among the locals, and that pays off in a moment where they actually somehow manage to call up France in 1944. And apparently the filmmakers haven't figured out that there might be a slight problem with that during the German occupation. It just doesn't understand the show, and by the time the film reaches this climax, this action movie sort of finale where they're battling off on the beach against a German U-boat of all things, which is completely absurd and just not anything to do with how Dad's Army should be, you just think to yourself, who do they think they're kidding? This revival of Dad's Army is feeble at best. The absolutely fantastic cast are utterly wasted at the hands of an awful script that thrusts Catherine Zeta-Jones above all else, and the core premise of the film quickly runs dry. The characters are barely even caricatures themselves, with Toby Jones straining so hard to make what he has to do amusing, while others almost fall into the background. It's a movie that seems to have been made by people with absolutely no affinity or real interest in the source material. Director Oliver Parker's inept ineptitude with a comic set piece that deserves a stupid boy insult of its own. It's a tedious, repetitious, and downright lazy comedy hiding behind a recognisable name and deserves a dishonourable discharge. On the next episode, we'll be joining Tom Hiddleston and Jeremy Irons for a bloody class struggle in High Rise, but until then, I'm Matthew Burke, fading out.